Hello and welcome to another special bonus episode of Half Hour Mentor with me, Ian Cleverden. If you're new to this audio podcast series, its main objective is to support anyone who wishes to work on their personal and professional development with inspirational advice from successful people of various backgrounds. Each one of them has been there, done it, and is still out there doing it. 2 series are available to date, with Series 3 launching in September 2023. Listener feedback so far has also shown that these episodes, lasting around 30 minutes each, have been very popular with anyone interested to hear about the backstory of successful people. At the end of every episode, I ask each guest what one piece of advice they would give their younger self, knowing what they know now. Invariably, this can stretch to 2 or 3 pieces of advice, but the comments have proved to be very popular and helpful. Therefore, in the lead up to Series 3, I thought I would prepare a bonus episode for each of the first 2 series that focuses on these golden nuggets of advice and inspiration. This episode features my guests from Series 2, most of whom are involved in the creative arts, more specifically music, fiction writing, script writing, and various forms of arts management and consultancy. Incidentally, Series 3 will also be focusing on the creative arts. Let's start by hearing from the musicians I interviewed in Series 2, Charlie Dore, Katie Spencer and Finlay Napier. Finlay Napier is a Scottish singer-songwriter who has many strings to his bow, if you pardon the musical pun. He's released several solo albums and is a member of the folk rock supergroup The Magpie Arc. Finn also runs a variety of songwriting workshops across the UK. So what was his advice to his younger self?
I think it would be to have more confidence in my abilities, because I don't think I was as confident in my songwriting as I could have been. And I think maybe I could have made more of that sooner. I think if I'd perhaps not even worked on it much more, I think just had the confidence to go out and do more gigs and be a bit more pushy about it. There was other people around me that thought I should be putting more energy into other things. And I foolishly believed them. Well, maybe not foolishly. Doesn't matter. It's what's done is done. But I think had I maybe just been a bit more like, no, I know what I'm doing here, and just carried on, I think my career may have gone in a different direction, because I think I was onto something early on, and somewhere along the way I hit a wall, and I think it's because I wasn't doing what I should have been doing. If that makes sense.
It's interesting that, just as we heard in Series 1, lack of confidence at a young age rears its head again, and, here's a spoiler alert folks, it's going to crop up again in this episode. So how did Finn approach looking for a mentor?
I was talking to Gillian, my wife, about who could be a mentor, and she said, well, what is it you want to do? I said, well, I want to write songs for people like Eddie Vedder. And remember that time we supported that guy, Boo Hewerdine? I want to be able to do a gig like at that gig that Boo did, where I'm telling stories and I'm singing songs. And he writes songs for Eddie Vedder, I said, and the other thing that he does is that he teaches songwriting. So that means he'll be a really good teacher. And I'd like to be a really good songwriting teacher too. And Jill was like, do you not think maybe you should ask Boo Hewerdine then? So what you're saying is there's one man who is also a good teacher that fills all the 3 things you want to do. Why not ask him? So I did. And he was delighted. And that's been one of the most amazing things, because he's like my best mate. And we've done so much work together, from the first album we did together, VIP, that we co-wrote, to the Bird and a Wire online songwriting workshops that we did, and then the face-to-face songwriting things that we do. And we're about to do another one called Stages. He's running it with Maniac Moore, and I'm coming in as a songwriting tutor. And that's an incredible project where it's like Boo is going to take 12 people from writing the songs right the way through the entire process, recording the music and taking the music onto the stage. So, I think that would have been a brilliant thing for me as a young singer-songwriter. I think it would have been incredible.
Another hugely experienced, award-winning singer-songwriter is Charlie Dore. She is perhaps best known for her hit Pilot of the Airwaves, which was the last song to be played on the infamous pirate radio station Radio Caroline. She's also had songs recorded by the likes of Tina Turner, Celine Dion and George Harrison, to name but 3. She also co-wrote the number 1 hit by Jimmy Nail, Ain't No Doubt, and has starred in many film and TV productions. What was her advice?
To my younger self, I'd say, stop talking and listen. Take your time. Don't be a people pleaser. Don't think powerful people automatically know what's better for you than you do, as opposed to, in talking about a good song, And to be kind, but don't be the most obliging person in the room, because, and practice more and read more. Yes, I think that sort of covers it, because I'm very friendly, you see. I'm very friendly and sociable. And that's where I reiterate, be kind. Be kind to people, because you never know what somebody's just experienced, But at the same time, it's important to do what you believe in, I think.
Given her vast experience and success in songwriting, I was keen to find out what her approach is to generating ideas for a new song.
It's what Robin Williams would call the bing moment, where you go, bing! Oh, I could do that. Oh, that's a good idea. That sort of thing. That the bing moment is important, and to follow that straight away, not to think, that's so good, I'll remember it tomorrow, because you won't. I won't anyway.
Of course, it's so much easier to capture that bing moment these days with recorders built into smartphones. The downside, though, is if you don't develop that idea immediately, you'll have hundreds of unfinished ideas on your phone, something that, as a songwriter myself, I'm very guilty of. If you don't have time to develop that idea immediately, dedicate some time to work on it in the very near future. That's something that I've learned from my interviews and now put into practice. In every series, I like to hear from someone who is at the relatively early stage of their career. In this series, I met up with the hugely talented singer-songwriter Katie Spencer. You can hear Katie's fabulous backstory in a full episode. But what was her advice to her younger self?
This reminds me of a funny quote that I remember Roy Harper saying once, and he said, this is a song that I wrote when I was 17 and I was reminiscing. I thought that was quite a good quote.
Great.
I think I've really focused, especially since the lockdown, on it. I know, I'm aware that it's a bit of a cliche, but I think it's so important, and I don't think you should shy away from it because it's a cliche. But this idea of having an honest voice and taking that literally, singing with your honest voice, I think is really important. Taking that thought in kind of a wider sense and making the music that you want to make, not thinking, I should write a song about this, or I should write a song in this style because that's what people want. I don't think that's got any kind of longevity in it. So I think just being honest and taking that right through to everything, if it doesn't feel right to play a particular gig, then don't do it, and you don't have to have a reason other than it doesn't feel right or something like that, just using your honest voice in as many ways as you can, really. It's quite a vulnerable thing to just suddenly choose to do something like write a song and share it with people, but if it's an honest thing, then I think, for me, it feels easier.
I love the point about communicating musically with your honest voice, as that's what separates you from everyone else. Katie's certainly doing that to good effect. I'm recording this in the summer of 2023, during which she's been asked to play at the vast majority of the UK's major folk festivals, and her popularity rightly goes from strength to strength, so best of luck, Katie. I also asked each of my songwriting guests whether they start with music or lyrics first, a common question asked by budding songwriters. Let's hear what they said. Firstly, Katie.
Music. Yes, music.
Finlay Napier.
Mostly lyrics first.
Finally, Charlie Dore.
It's a song, so music first. There are two provisos here. One is that if it's boring musically, you can't rescue a horrible tune with a fabulous lyric. I don't think it's possible. However, with a song that is half decent musically, you can upgrade it enormously with a fabulous lyric.
I think we can therefore conclude that there's no right way of starting to write a song. Just make sure that when the idea arrives, you capture it in recorded form and develop the idea as soon as you can. Even if you think in the end that it's not good enough, at least you'll have learnt from the process. In episode 19, I caught up with Neil Pearson, founder of Sounds Just Fine, an artist management and market development agency for the music business. Neil works with some of the biggest names in the folk, roots and acoustic music world, both nationally and internationally, with particular ties to the US and Canadian music scene. Alongside managing a portfolio of artists, he's also known for project managing some of the best known collaborations in the folk and roots world. One of his earliest successes was being encouraged by Shrewsbury Folk Festival founder and programme director, the late Alan Surtees, to get into festival programming and artist management. What was his advice to his younger self?
Wow, I think the teenage me would look at myself and probably couldn't believe my luck. I think the thing is, I went through my 20s scared of failure, scared of putting myself in a situation where I could be seen to fail. And actually, it's only having the kindness of Alan saying, I've got your back, don't you worry. If this goes wrong, it's my name on the door. It's confidence. It's self-belief. It's not worrying what other people think. Whether that's pride, ego, or a mixture of all those things, however it shakes down, I think my sort of shy, reserve, kind of, this isn't for me, I can't do it, almost feeling I didn't belong there. I kind of wish I'd started 10 years sooner, because I don't think there was anything I did in my 30s I couldn't have done in my 20s. I mean, it's not a regret, because I'm fortunate to have got where I've got to and I love my work. But I was kind of always waiting for permission. The only way to do it is to do it. I have no idea what I was waiting for, really.
Neil's backstory in the full episode is yet another example of someone feeling that they were lucky in their career development. Yet, when you listen back, he took risks, he followed his heart, and he grabbed the opportunities when they arose, a very common theme for those who love what they do and are successful. Let's now turn to the world of fiction writing with my guests Malcolm Hollingdrake, Simon McLeave and Matthew Smith. Have you ever felt that you have a book in you and that one day you'd love to write it and have it released to the big wide world of readers? Simon McLeave is a million-selling crime novelist known for his self-published D.I. Ruth Hunter series, currently being made into a TV series, and his HarperCollins published Anglesey series, both based around North Wales where he now lives. He had a hugely successful career in writing for TV, including programmes such as Silent Witness, The Bill and Doctors. So how did he get into publishing his own novels?
I think I spent a whole year listening and reading everything I could find on self-publishing and indie publishing, and realised that if I was going to do this, I needed to know everything about doing your own advertising, doing your own covers, or finding someone to do your covers, marketing, PR, all that stuff, price points, kind of. I mean, it was really interesting because it was a complete different skill set. But I knew that I needed to know as much as I could before I sort of hit the ground running. And also I realised that I needed probably 3 books rather than 1 book to start it off. So I wrote another book. I grew a mailing list and all that kind of stuff that you do as an indie publisher. And I launched the first book in January 2020. So the Snowdonia Killings came out in January 2020 with a pre-order to the second book. And it just, and when you're an indie publisher, you get to see every book that's sold. It's literally there on a kind of computer screen. You refresh the screen and you can see that you've sold another 5 books, which is quite exciting because, and it just sold lots and lots of books. And I was sort of gobsmacked. I kind of went, well, this is crazy. I'm selling hundreds of books and then thousands of books. And then I released the next one and the same thing happened again, but more. So I started scribbling away for the third book, which I released again. And I suppose the rest is history. I just carried on through the series, and I haven't looked back, I suppose, because people keep buying them. Well, that's what you call a meteoric rise. That said, he still had advice for his younger self. But you know what the advice I would give is? It's to sort of take things a little bit kind of more easier, be easier on myself, to be in the present a little bit more. I think I spent a lot of time in my youth living in the future, so pretty much projecting where I would want to be. And I think possibly a life lesson now I'm in my 50s is to, that's all well and good. And I've had a really interesting career and I enjoyed it all. But there are moments where you should just sort of stop for a moment and just enjoy it a little bit more rather than kind of focusing on the next thing. So that would be my advice. Malcolm Hollingdrake is the creator of the Harrogate Crime series featuring DCI Cyril Bennett. This series is currently formed of 13 books, which he self-publishes through Amazon. He is known for his highly detailed plots, wonderfully constructed characters and eloquent location descriptions, mainly based in Yorkshire. Not only that, but he also has a critically acclaimed 2-book Merseyside crime series published by Hobeck Books, with a third on the way very soon.
I asked Malcolm about how he plans his approach to writing a book.
At my stage now, I set myself a challenge of 1,000 words a day. It's not a lot, but I try to do 1,000 words. Because that also means reading the 1,000 words from the previous day and adjusting those. That doesn't come into the 1,000 words I'm going to do today. And then writing. And that will then sit on the table. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it might be 1,500, sometimes it might be 900. It's not written in stone, but it's nice to have a challenge.
Do you look at the rewrite and the review of yesterday's work first?
Yes.
Before you start on 1,000 words today?
Yes, because that's critical. It also it refreshes your mind where you left off. I also try to leave a note where I want the next day's work to go. So did I cover that the previous day? Did I achieve what I was hoping to achieve from the day before that? If yes, then I can carry straight on. If no, let's adjust that. Let's make it. Or an idea might have come to me in the middle of the night, or it takes me in a different direction.
So what was Malcolm's advice to his younger self?
Well, it comes into two. The first point is be brave and do what you think is right at the time. But also, I try to think of a pond and a pebble, and chucking the pebble in the pond is the decision, and watching where every ripple ends before you make that decision. And when you're happy with where it's settled, then move. But don't move straight away. Take time. What did they used to say? Sleep on it. And it's critical. Before you, if you get upset by somebody, don't just respond. Sleep on it. If you're happy then to respond in whatever way you're going to do, then do. But if not, keep on.
I think that's a great analogy because it's about reflection, but you can only see reflection once the ripples have gone. How many times have we jumped to respond to something or someone without thinking things through? I feel sure that you, dear listener, just like me, will have reacted too quickly to something in the past. I really like Malcolm's pebble and pond analogy, as you can probably tell. So, you're thinking of writing your first book. Is it better to plan your storylines meticulously, or just write and see what happens? Here's Malcolm's approach. So what's the idea? When you sit down to write the first page or the first chapter of a book,
One idea.
You must have a theme.
One idea. Just an idea. Right. And it could come from anywhere, and that's part of the pleasure of it all, really. It's also the worry, believe you me, it's also the worry. What do I write today? And once you're typing away. But this is the way that people like Ian Rankin work. We're known as pantsers because we just sit down and write. Whereas people like Frederick Forsyth are planners to the nth degree, and they have their storyboard set out, they know where they're going, and that's where their time is taken, where mine is taken, sitting at the keyboard and developing the idea.
Here's Simon's.
Start with the end. I mean, I'm very good at 3-act structure, so I know when turning points have to happen. understand. I always know the beginning. I always know the end. So that's all plotted out. And the middle bit, I sort of go and have a bit of an exploration and see quite how we get there. So it's definitely a hybrid writer.
Isn't it interesting how two very successful authors approach their work in entirely different ways? Does it affect the end result? In my opinion, absolutely not. I've read all the books written by both authors, and as a consequence, I contacted them individually to ask if they would appear on the series, as I was a big fan of their writing. It really surprised me how their approach to writing varied. So, you've decided to write your book. How should you market it, and what approach should you take? In episode 15, I had a fascinating discussion with Matthew Smith, director of Exprime, a literary agency and consultancy for both new and established authors. He has had decades of experience in the book publishing world. His view on how you plan your strategic approach was really interesting.
If you've written something and you genuinely want it to be published, you want it out there, you want it in book form, and you want people to read it, you have to decide what kind of author you want to be. You have to decide for yourself where you genuinely want to be with it. You know, if you want to be a great Penguin author, you have to take a very different route to someone who's quite happy to self-publish and put their book up on Amazon. And I think the earlier a writer makes that decision about the author that they want to become, that will define your next steps. So my advice would be to actually be honest with yourself. Step away from the creative process that's manufactured this wonderful piece of art. Take a step away and actually say, okay, I want to be an author, but really what kind of author do I want to be? If you want to be a successful thriller writer, do you genuinely want to be writing the 20th book in that series in 20 years' time? Now, it might seem a bit daft to talk about things like that, but what you do next, particularly if you're successful, could define your entire writing career. And the number of writers who can stay writers and write what they want and be successful at it is very, very small indeed. And I think is getting smaller all the time. It sounds a bit joyless, doesn't it? I'm sorry if it does sound a bit joyless, because we do, I think everyone in the industry, from the writers themselves through to editorial assistants through to publishing directors, still get a buzz out of books. If they didn't, they shouldn't be working there. But I think the one thing I've learned is that it can't just be about the joy of the creative process and engaging with words and thinking that, you know, I'm at the forefront of something very exciting. You do have to be very commercial. It's brutal, but it's the way the world works. And unless you want to keep your manuscript in a drawer and bring it out occasionally and say, God, I'm not a bad writer, you have to think that way, and you have to decide what route you want to go down.
I'm sure you'll agree that Matthew's advice is really thought-provoking and invaluable for budding authors. What advice would he give his younger self?
You know what? I think this is such a fascinating question, particularly having worked since I was 16. So I've been working now, 40 years solidly. Always been in work, never been out of job. And the one thing I would say is the job isn't everything. That's the first thing. But also lose a bit of the arrogance and don't take anything personally, because it is just a job. We all become very invested in what we do. And I think particularly if you're in a creative industry, you really can throw heart and soul into it. Or if you're an entrepreneur, or even if you're working in a bank, you become the best at what you do. And then every single knock or slight can seem very, very personal. It can seem that it's directed against you. The one thing I learned from working in big corporations is no one cares less, really, about whether you're upset or not. What you've got to do is focus on your job and doing the best you can. And you know what? Coming home at night and being happy with everything else around you and having time to do that. Again, these are cliches, but you do learn the hard way the things that matter. And your job can matter, but don't let it be the only thing that matters.
Someone else who's had a huge success in the field of writing is Steve Bennett. Prior to his current role as Director of Drama at Cambridge University's Downing College, Steve has had a stellar career as a scriptwriter, most notably on the writing panels of soap operas Coronation Street and Emmerdale. So what advice would he give his younger scriptwriting self?
What you need to concentrate on, I think what would have helped me a lot, is having structures and frameworks in place that I didn't necessarily understand at the time, and not trying to overreach, doing something that is within your scope at that time. When I first started teaching, this goes right back to that pottery thing. The guy who was my boss said, one of the worst things you can do with a student is to give them a blank piece of paper and say, do something nice on that. So because the only thing they can do is make it look worse. But when I thought about it, I realised what he meant, that it's just so intimidating unless somebody's given you instructions, unless somebody's given you a framework. So he said the best thing to do on a blank piece of paper is draw a frame, and then tell your student, work inside that frame and only use circles and triangles to make a pattern, or only use this, that and the other, or only do flower shapes or something, and then expand from there. And what I try and do now with students at Cambridge is I give them 20 minutes. Your idea, your vision, your play has got a 20-minute structure. So you write within that structure. If you can do that, because half the time you're editing yourself as you're going through it, you're already starting to work within a process. And once you've done that, and if you can do that successfully, it's not easy. Then you can start to think, I'm going to expand this story now because I wanted to talk about this and I wanted to talk about that. But even then, you would say, I'm not going to go over 80 pages. This is a 20-minute script. If you write for a British soap, ITV, it's 27 minutes, and that's it. Anything out of that gets cut. And so you've got to get used to writing to a structure and disciplining yourself.
And those are things you don't really realise. You just think, I'm going to create, it's all going to be wonderful. But it's the structure that helps. The structure actually makes you more creative. Georges Braque, the Cubist artist, said, too much colour is the same as no colour. And it's true. You give somebody too many things to throw at the canvas and you just get a mess. But you give somebody a structure and they'll create. They'll do something that's positive and something that's creative. They've channeled their creativity, basically.
What was Steve's advice to budding scriptwriters?
There was somebody who was talking on television over here in the States last week about lighting the runway for people who have all the skill and all the talent, and they're all soaring away above your head. But what you need to do is light the runway for them to land. And I thought it was a really nice analogy to say that, and that's what we're trying to do, just to give them somewhere to bring it all together, basically, so that people can see their work. And that's the thing that, for any new writer or actor, get seen, get read. There are far more opportunities than people imagine. You can put a show on. If you're really determined, you can find somewhere to do it. It might be upstairs in a pub, or it might be in a cafe, or somebody. There'll be somebody in your community who will tolerate the mad idea of you doing, your one-man Christmas carol, or whatever it might be, or one-woman Christmas carol, which would be more fun.
What a great analogy from Steve there. I also thought it was important to hear from someone who has driven the development of the creative arts field from a senior strategic perspective. Therefore, in the final episode of the second series, I had a really interesting chat with Lord Mike Story. Mike is a life peer in the House of Lords. He's the Liberal Democrat spokesperson on education and is the co-chair of the party Parliamentary Education, Families and Young People Committee. He's probably best known for being responsible for Liverpool being awarded the European Capital of Culture in 2008, when, in his role as leader of Liverpool City Council, helped to transform the city culturally, and the developments from that time were instrumental in it being asked to host the Eurovision Song Contest on behalf of Ukraine earlier this year, 2023. So what was Mike's advice to his younger self?
Follow your dream. It's as simple as that. And if that's what you want to do whatever it takes to get there, and you'll succeed in the end.
He also shared with us his approach on how he and the City Council managed their bid for the Capital of Culture. The story was not only a masterclass in planning, but it was also hilarious. Here it is.
Well, it started on after I'd won the May elections. I didn't expect...
In 1998?
Yes, I didn't expect us to win that year. I thought it would be the following year. And I was doing the BBC election night results programme, and suddenly we were winning awards we'd never won before. Speak and Dovecot, and Roger Phillips, the interviewer, the host of the evening, said, look, Mike, you better go because there'll be people wanting to talk to you from the media. And I left the BBC studios, which is then on Paradise Street, and I was by myself, and I walked to where all the media were gathered in the municipal buildings, and I thought, what on earth am I going to say? What can I say? And I came up with the phrase, because Liverpool is obviously passionate about sport, particularly football, and had 2 Premier League clubs, still does, just about, and came up with the phrase, I want Liverpool to be a premier European city. And I was going to a conference in Glasgow, and we were travelling in the council car, and the chief executive was sitting in the front, and he was sort of saying, look, I've got some bits of correspondence here, let's go through them while we're driving back to Liverpool. Now, there's this sort of letter about applying to be a European Capital of Culture. We don't want to do that, do we? And at the time, Liverpool had applied under the previous council to be a city of architecture, and it had been a bit of an embarrassment, to be quite honest. And I think he felt, look, we've had that embarrassment, let's not do that. But I thought to myself, well, if I want to sort of succeed in Liverpool being a premier European city, isn't this the way to do it? So I said, Mr. Bounds, we certainly do want to do that, and sort of reached the letter. And the rest was history, really. We were chief executive then retired, had done a fantastic job in stabilising Liverpool. And David Henshaw, who had been the chief executive of Knowsley, came in. And he and I were absolutely determined we'd get on the shortlist for European Capital of Culture. And we did everything it took to get on that shortlist. We set up a dedicated team. Granada Television seconded some of their staff to us. And everybody was really focused focused on this. And then we got onto the final shortlist, and it was a proper, it wasn't just like, we'll give it to this city. The judging panel were absolutely ruthless in their appraisal. And the chair of the panel was Jeremy Isaacs, who'd been the first chief executive of Channel 4 and of the Royal Opera House. And they came on the final 2-day visit. So there were 3 cities on the final list, including Newcastle, the favourites. And we'd heard that they'd got a bit fed up of being PowerPointed out by PowerPoint presentations. So we said, okay. So when the judges arrived, they got off the coach. There were 8 judges. We said, look, Liverpool is free. You go where you want to go. Here are some suggestions. And that first night, it was a real ale pub tour. What's that got to do with culture? I'm not quite sure, but it was that. It was a performance of the Playhouse. It was, a list of things. And of course, we had all those venues immaculately organised. So
they knew very well that they were on the list to be visited. Yes.
So when they went to do the Real Ale pub tour, they went to Dr. Duncan's, and lo and behold, there was a poet, believe it or not, in the pub reciting poetry. And when they went to the next
coincidence.
pub, yes, there was a ballet dancer actually practising on the bar rail. And it all went incredibly well that first evening. And the next day they were going off on all various visits. But we ended the night at the Comedy Club at the Albert Dock. And what had been a spectacular success went horribly, horribly wrong, because the final act of the night was Nige from Toxteth, and this comedian in shell suit started saying, "We've got effing capital culture judges." And I thought, oh no. And in that moment when the sweat drops down the back of your neck, I thought, no, this is going to be a disaster. And what do they know about effing culture? The trouble is all the culture we've got is for the effing tourists. And Jeremy Isaac looked bemused. Miranda Sawyer smiled. She was a writer on contemporary music. And I thought, oh God, we've just lost it. The next morning, we meet the judges to set them on the way to visit these places. And I said, Jeremy, I'm really sorry about last night. And he said, sorry? He said, when I got up this morning, he said I had a message from one of your residents. And he got out the letter, and the resident had said, "Dear Jeremy, I'm really sorry about last night. I was at the club, and this is not how, you must have been really embarrassed." And Jeremy looked at me and said, "But I effing enjoyed it."
Well, I wonder where Nige of Toxteth is now. Oh well, what a great story from Mike though. It's only right that the final word should go to my very first guest in the series, best-selling author, change management consultant and coach Simon Phillips. While Simon is not directly involved in the creative arts industry, his expertise on managing change, motivation and time management is definitely of benefit to everyone in the industry and beyond. Bearing in mind that he works with many individuals and organisations in managing change, both personally and corporately, what advice would he give his younger self?
I think be curious. I think that's what I would... I am naturally curious anyway, but I think I would have been even more curious knowing what I know now. And that would have led me down paths. And not worry so much. Every successful story has started somewhere with a big risk, but it's only how you view it at the time. Is it really a big risk in the bigger scheme of things, in your whole life story? It probably isn't. It can feel like it, but if you actually just analyze it and think, okay, so what's the worst case scenario here? And let's say you're switching jobs and you've got a nice income at the moment, or your first job pays well, but it's not quite what you love doing. The risk is you lose that bit of money. But if you accept that, then you can immediately switch your mind to, so how am I going to do it then? And we are all naturally resourceful, and we have an amazing community of people around us that will always be there to help and support us. So just, have a realistic understanding of what the risk really is. The risk usually is the risk of doing nothing and just sticking to what you're doing. So I think that's what I would advise my younger self.
And if you're someone who's thinking of giving up that full-time job to pursue the path of your dreams, whether that's in the creative arts or elsewhere, I can't think of a better quote on which to end. We all have big risks to face at various stages of our lives, but how big is it in the grand scheme of things? And are you following your heart? Equally, who can help you to talk things through? Well, I'd like to say a huge thank you to all of my guests to date. As I said in the Series 1 Advice Highlights episode, if you find that just one piece of advice you've heard today resonates with you and helps you plan your next life event, my objectives for this podcast series will have been achieved. Please do share with me on social media or directly via email how the podcasts have helped you grow, and also if you have any topics that you'd like me to cover in the future. The ways to contact me and provide feedback can be found in the show notes. I do hope you've enjoyed this retrospective of Series 2. If so, please share it with anyone whom you feel would benefit from listening. Also, go back and have a listen to the full episodes if you haven't already done so, as hearing the backstories of my guests allows you to put their advice into the context of their journeys. You can find out more about my guests from the links in the respective episode show notes. It would also be a great help if you could rate and review the podcast wherever you get your pods. If you're an educational institution or a business looking for professional podcast production support and you like the approach that I take in my production style, please do get in touch. I'm a freelance podcast producer and composer, and I'd be happy to discuss your requirements. My details can be found in the show notes. Well, that's it for now. Thanks very much for listening, and stay tuned for more fabulous life lessons and backstories in Series 3 coming very soon. Until then, bye for now.